get underway. Izzy's going to kick us off and I'm going to go up with her. But I might pray for us to start. Or do you want to pray? I pray. Alright. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for all the love you show us and in the many ways that you show it to us. We pray tonight that we will be built up and faithful to you as we present and listen and learn. And I pray that all of this will be done for your glory. Amen.
Alright, let's get started. Cool. Disclaimers first. Fair warning, this is a topic that gets very close to my heart, so I might get emotional, but that's okay. So what I say is based on my experience. Not everything I say will be true for everyone. Please keep that in mind. The goal of this musing is to start a conversation, not answer every question. I can't do that the time I've been given, let alone if I was given a whole day. I'm not a qualified counsellor, psychologist, or therapist. I'm not going to have all the answers. I don't really even have any of the answers. I'm just musing. Finally, if you don't struggle with anxiety, you probably know someone who does. So this musing is for everyone, not just the chronically anxious. I think that's really important. Knowing about anxiety is not just for the people who experience anxiety, it's for everyone, because everyone knows someone who's anxious. Which leads me on to my next bit. Why talk about anxiety? So studies have shown, many studies, I haven't listed them here because I've just been doing a research proposal and did not want to do any more research, or at least list citations. So, Gen Z is known as the most anxious generation. Studies have shown that 1 in 2 Gen Zers are likely to be anxious or affected by anxiety. And 3, anxiety is not talked about enough in the church. This is partly to do with mental health, only being a thing that churches are tackling kind of in the last 20 to 30 years. And so yeah, we really need to start talking about it. So, turn to the person next to you, or sorry, I should start with I'm Izzy. And I teach part-time, so if I sound like your high school English teacher, I'm really sorry. But that's what I do. I'm finishing my degree. I'm also my 6th year, which is why I haven't seen around as much. Turn the person next to you, or the 2 people next to you, or 3 people next to you, have a quick chat. What is anxiety? 30 seconds. Alright, bring it back to 3, 2, 1. Thanks everybody. Anyone shout an answer, what is anxiety? There's no one right definition, so just shout something out. Hands raised. A disproportionate amount of anxiety in daily life. Disproportionate amount of anxiety in daily life. Cool. Anyone expand on that or say something different that they thought of?
And stress before a situation. Over analysing and stuff.
Yep. Stress before a situation. Overanalyzing. Any other thoughts?
I think there's a positive part to it as well. That like not all anxiety is bad, and so it's just
Absolutely.
more of a general a response to a stressful situation.
Absolutely. Yes, and I wish I had more time to talk about that one. Not all anxiety is bad. Fun facts. Alright. So, actually, before we move on to that, I'm going to talk very quickly just so you know that I'm qualified. I've experienced lots of different kinds of anxiety in my life. I probably experienced social anxiety for the first time when I was like 10, 11. We moved overseas. I experienced lots of different outcomes to that. Anxiety can lead to depression. It can lead to social withdrawal syndrome, which I grew up in Japan, and that's a really common thing there. And it's a thing that the church really notices, and it makes them really sad. Yeah, there are lots of different ways to experience anxiety, and I've experienced a few. If you want to chat more about that, I do love talking about that, but I do cry while talking about it, so we're moving on. Alright, has anyone heard this verse? I have a love-hate relationship with this verse. This verse is the wrong thing to say to someone who's struggling with anxiety. If you haven't heard that, you need to hear it now. If someone says, I'm feeling really anxious, don't go, oh, don't anxious. It's not going to work. The second part, that's great. In every situation, prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, presents request God. Amazing. Fabulous. But everyone focuses on the first part where Paul says, do not be don't be anxious because of these things. He's trying to encourage people. He's not trying to tell them what they shouldn't do. So, based on this verse, there are a few things people have said that I've actually heard people say to me personally, or had people, friends who have said to them. And these are things that they're two ways to phrase the same thing. The first one is often heard in more Pentecostal and liberal type churches. The second is heard more in conservative churches. They're two sides of the same coin. You're just anxious because you don't believe enough or have enough faith, and that anxiety is a sin. All of these things I'm saying, you can take and see, well, this one, no, this is wrong. This is a lie. That's a fact. You can't argue it any other way. Neither of these things are true. People really need to hear that. I know for some of us we're sitting there going, oh, but isn't that just common sense? You can't control your anxiety, therefore it's not a sin. But there are a lot of people who have actually been living their lives thinking that these things are true, and so we really need to keep this in mind when we're talking about anxiety in a Christian context. And there are a lot of people who have been set up to view anxiety through this lens. Yep, it's wrong. Alright, so I read a book recently by Paul Grimmond, and I will talk about it briefly at the end. But he talks about anxiety as being related to three distinct different areas of our lives: our mind, our body, and our environment. And so I want you to turn to people next to you, half a minute, and chat about what do you think are ways that anxiety plays out in each of these three specific spheres. You can focus on one if you'd like, but I'd just like you to turn, chat with people around you. How does anxiety present itself, impact, play out in these three specific spheres of life? Alright, let's come back together. I would love his answers. What are ways you can see anxiety playing out in each of these three spheres? Any thoughts?
I guess physical symptoms like sweating, like palpitations, and shaking.
Yep. What else? Yep, catastrophizing. Is that on the mind? With that environment, how does anxiety play out in our environment? Any thoughts?
Probably don't want to go out more.
Yep, yes, you don't want to go
Shut
out.
yourself in.
Yeah.
Try to control your environment.
Try to control your environment. Why do you do that?
So that you can control what causes you anxiety.
Yeah, so you can control what's causing you anxiety. Brilliant. Absolutely. These are all things that are part of what makes our anxiety and what shapes our anxiety. Our body and mind both present symptoms of anxiety and can contribute to how our anxiety runs. Our environment is often a direct contributor to how anxiety works. The way we experience life is our environment. And so if our environment is causing uncertainty, that can cause us to be anxious and can be a key factor in anxiety. Just disclaimer, when I do talk about anxiety, I am mainly talking about the mental health disorder, not general anxious feelings. So anxiousness feelings versus anxiety is basically chronic anxiousness that you can't stop. Anxious feelings that go away are very different, especially if they're not repeated over long periods of time, to anxiety mental health condition. That said, this stuff can inform anxious feelings too. Cool. So, my question here is, do we have complete control over our mind and our body? reaction, etc., things that we cannot control, are not 100% completely simple ever. And so we need to know that. But we need to know this as well. Anxiety is not a sin, but it can lead to sin if we're not careful. It's much like many other things that happen in our lives and bodies, sin can be a reaction or affect how we respond. The way we respond to anxiety can actually hurt our relationships and therefore hurt the people we're in relationships with. Just thinking of a few different ones. For me, I feel very self-conscious talking about this, but anxiety has really affected the way I interact with my boyfriend. And I would much rather not tell him anything ever, and if he reads my mind, that's great. But that's not actually loving to him at all. It's not kind, and it's not considering how he's feeling or thinking in the situation. Not only am I not letting that person who wants to love me, but I'm actually expecting them to do extra work because I don't want to do the work it takes to communicate with him. And non-communication can result in frustration because people don't know how you're feeling. And that's really hard for both you and the other people involved in our relationship. And our response to anxiety is not a choice. But our response to anxiety is. And it can look different for everyone. I'm not going to go into a million ways, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. Because while anxiety is not a sin, we can get too wrapped up in that and excuse everything that comes out of our anxiety. And that's really important to separate those two things and make them quite distinct. Yeah, and the way we respond, sorry, letting spell wrong. The way we respond to anxiety can mean we stop caring for people and letting them care for us, which does play out to that. I know that I personally have experienced times when I wanted to care for someone at church, I've gone, but I don't know them well enough. What if they think it's weird? Maybe I better just not, maybe I just stand over here and watch the situation happen. If you want to help and anxiety is stopping you, that kind of sucks. And God calls for us to love and care for other people. And so if your anxiety is explicitly stopping you and explicitly stopping you from caring and loving other people, that's actually something that you need to look at and figure out how you're responding to that anxiety and figure out ways to change that. And like that takes time, that takes effort, that's not easy. But our response to anxiety is actually our responsibility. Cool. Alright, we're gonna move on from that. Lie. If I wasn't anxious, I could serve God better. Take 30 seconds, chat about that statement with the person next to you. Why is that not true? Go. Alright, thanks guys. Come right together in 3, 2, 1. Awesome, love to some answers.
I think God puts us all in unique situations, and actually it gives each unique individual a different kind of reach and area. So there's no one cookie cutter mold of what serving looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts?
God uses our weaknesses.
Good use our weaknesses, yep. Cool. Alright. Caitlin actually gave me a really nice segue. The first, it's really easy to believe that if we were less anxious, we could serve God more. At church, in our day-to-day life, sharing gospel, etc. I've thought this thought a lot of times. The reason I'm putting this up here is not because other people will tell it to you, it's usually because you'll tell it to yourself. And I know I've really used this to tell myself that I should be doing better and that I'm not measuring up to the mark. But that's not how God works. And we're going to spend a bit of time in this passage, which I know probably most of you know. Who's at least heard of this passage before? Yep, cool. A lot of you. I'm going to read it out. Actually, might I get someone from the audience to read it out? If not, that's fine.
Sure.
Thanks.
The whole thing.
Yep.
Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So, the bit that people really like to focus on in this particular passage is that last bit there. When I am weak, then I am strong. Now, that's not the part of the passage I find the most useful. I think it's good, I think it's a reasonable summary, but that's not my favorite part of the passage. My favorite part of the passage is bold there. God's words, my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness. Often when we fixate on this verse, it's very easy to get a skewed view of what Paul's talking about. And to think that our weakness equates to our strength, based on that last bit, for when I am weak, then I am strong. But if we look further back, which is really necessary, specifically in this passage, it's really necessary all the time, we need context all the time. Satan has given Paul a thorn in his flesh. He has pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away, and each time God has said, my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness. That says nothing about our strength. That says nothing about what we're capable of. His power is made perfect in our weakness. God's. Yeah, not ours. God's. That doesn't mean when we're weak we're going to feel strong. And I don't know about those of you in the room who experience anxiety, but my anxiety makes me feel really weak. Makes me feel incapable. Makes me feel like I can't do anything. And it's been 13, 14 years since I realized that anxiety was a problem in my life. I've pleaded way more than 3 times for God to take it away. Way more than 3. I don't know if that's your experience or if you've known someone who's experienced long-suffering anxiety. But a really hard thing is when you think your anxiety is going to go away. And it might not. It might, but it might not. But the reassurance in this verse is not for when I'm weak, then I'm strong. The reassurance comes before that. My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. I love that word sufficient. Enough. Complete. It means that we don't need anything else. It is sufficient. And that's really important. And my dad gave a sermon on this passage, which is why I'm so familiar with it. I've heard that sermon probably 45 times. It's a really good one. And if I preach more often, I would. But I remember my dad saying this bit. I was probably 30 when I heard it. He said, the Christian life is a lot like putting one foot in front of the other. And it looks like strength, weakness, strength, weakness. And every time that strength foot falls, it's God's. It's not yours. And this has been a really key player in me understanding that I'm not going to feel strong or stable when I'm anxious. That's not what God says. What God says is that He is sufficient and He is enough. And that's what we need. But, yeah, it is hard when we hear things like your anxiety will go away and this isn't forever. What if it never goes away? How does 2 Corinthians play into that? What does
thing is that like it doesn't, if what if it never goes away, it's still, I guess, doesn't like invalidate the fact that God's got an amazing relationship with us.
Yeah. It doesn't invalidate God's grace. Great point. Whether it goes away or not, God's grace is still there. Yeah. Any other thoughts? That's okay. Cool. I'm going to tell you briefly about my week. I'm again trying not to cry. This week really, really, really sucked. It was one of the worst weeks of anxiety, probably in a year or two, which kind of ironic considering what I'm talking about, but that might have been God going, hey, you could talk about this, so I'm going to try. What this passage has looked for me this week, I'm actually going to go back to it. What this passage has looked for me this week is my head not working any way it should. My body breaking down and going, no, you can't do this. Nausea, shaking, the entire week, not being able to sleep. And every time I prayed, all I could hear was this verse in my head. And I kind of said, God, but it's still not working. I'm still anxious. Life still sucks. How does that work? I kept getting up, going to each thing I had to get to, teaching my kids, sitting through other classes, at some point trying not to cry like I'm doing right now. But that's what God's grace looks like. Sometimes God's grace is being able to wake up each day. The fact that I could walk through those classes and still come out the end alive, that's God's grace. God's grace is sometimes having other people pray for me, like I had people pray for me this week. God's grace is knowing that even though you can't do it, you will, and putting one foot in front of the other is enough. And that's basically all I did this week, was one foot in front of the other, because that's all I felt I could manage. But by God's grace, this week still passed, and I'm reaching the end of another week, and I would love to go into it in great detail, but sometimes that is what God's grace looks like. It looks like just putting one foot in front of the other and trusting that His grace is sufficient. Talking to other people is a great part of knowing God's grace is sufficient, other Christians. And that's how I spent part of my week as well. I messaged friends and I said, hey, I'm anxious. It's really bad. That's it. That's all I have the energy for. And they wrote back and they said they were praying. Voice messages, praying. A voice message from my boyfriend reading Psalm 42, which says, why my soul are you downcast? Not trying to fix things, but pointing me to God. God's grace, and God's grace in His word is in the people He's given around you. And you can lean on them and they will help you put one foot in front of them. Alright, that was rambling. Let's move on because I just got to get to his rather long, untold presentation. Practical tips. I really want to talk a lot about everything about anxiety. First of all, I don't know a ton, and second of all, I think this is a really important part of when we're going to have a short time to talk about anxiety, because practical tips are really good. It's one thing to know that God's grace is sufficient for you. It's another thing to actually be using the tools that God's given you to help combat that anxiety. Because guess what? Science is a tool that God gives us to understand the world, and that means that it can help us understand our bodies. So, we've got mind, body, environment, these three things. What are ways we use to take care of our mind and our body? Shout next out. What are things we can do to take care of our mind and our body? Not necessarily anxiety related, in general. Exercise, yep. What else?
Sleep.
Sleep, yep. What else?
Shower.
Shower, absolutely.
Healthy eating.
Healthy eating, yeah, of course. Fabulous. So, there are things we can do to care for our body and our mind, and these help our anxiety. Because if both our body and our mind are factors that play into our anxiety and how we experience anxiety, we actually need to be doing our best to be taking care of these things so they can be healthy and be able to respond in their best capacity to anxiety. So, these are a few things. Look, I mentioned at the beginning, which I'll mention at the end, touched on these particular things. Some of these are really interchangeable. I've tried to button them up as best I can. Diet is really important for our body. There's there's lots of research to show that our gut and what we put into our body actually affects how we think and our ability to cope with mental health. Specifically sugar. Apparently eating sugar causes a lot of anxiety, so like exercise. Yeah, there are a lot of studies that show going for walks is good for your mental health. I know a lot of teachers who go for walks every day after school because they really need it. Exercise can look different to different people. I hate exercise, I hate cardio, I hate basically any kind of moving in my body. But I dance twice a week for like 3 hours. And that is, I found once I started doing that, it was a lot easier to cope with some of my anxiety. Even last week when I felt like I was not going to die, but definitely felt like I was in like the drowning stage of things, I was able to go dance for half an hour, have a few dances, and it felt a whole lot better. Because exercise releases a chemical called endorphins. And endorphins helps your brain. Finally, deep breathing. As Christians, we get scared of anything to do with deep breathing or meditation because, oh no, what if I accidentally call on the wrong God? Or something similar. That's not how it works. Paul talks about meat sacrificed to idols, etc. I don't know how well you guys know the passage, but basically his idea is that if something is done for the purpose of serving a particular God and you know about it, that it's wrong, but if something is done simply for the purpose of helping your body, it's not actually wrong. And that's a really cool summary, that's all I've got time for. Deep breathing, there are a lot of videos on YouTube. Breathing helps. Breathing helps me calm kids down at school. We've got breathe around the box, but light the candle, breathe around the flower petals, it's a whole thing. But it works, I've seen it, and I've used it. Breathing's a big way of how we control our body's reactions to things. Cool, mine. Sleep, I feel like is self-explanatory. I got better sleep last night and I'm less anxious today, I'll tell you that for free. Medication can be good. Again, science is a tool that God's given us. We can use it if we need it. And I know there's a lot of stuff around Christians, whether or not using medication is a good or bad thing. As a teacher, I see a lot of kids without medication and the choices that their parents make behind those things. Medication can be really good, but it can also have a lot of side effects, and so it's something we need to approach with wisdom, but it's not ultimately wrong. Lovely. Read your Bible and prayer. This feels obvious sometimes, but I'm really bad at reading my Bible. And I find that I'm a lot less anxious when I do. Not even if the Bible passage is about being anxious. It's simply about hearing from God. Because when we're hearing from God, we have His words actually in our minds. Often it's easier because even if we don't know it, we're still dwelling on God's words. And God's word is good for us. It says so in the Bible. And then prayer is the other side of that. Prayer is talking to God. Talking to God, telling our anxieties. The Bible tells us to cast all our anxieties on Him. It doesn't say that's the solution, but it does tell us to do that. So we need to cast our anxieties on Him. And also, you know how meditation, people think meditation is really good for anxiety? Prayer was the first form of meditation. It's just our thoughts are going somewhere, just not in our heads. Cool. Dealing with our environment. Don't avoid your environment, it will make your anxiety worse. Dealing with your anxiety, you can often lead it to spike in the short term, but it will be better in the long run. For me, that looks like often as a teenager getting out of my comfort zone, doing something usually with my mum going like that, to actually do something, get out of the house, join an activity, etc. Things I was anxious about, I'm going to do them anyway. I did them anyway, and fun fact, when you step out of your comfort zone, you can actually expand your comfort zone. Saying yes to new things builds your comfort zone and builds your tolerance and to be able to do things. So if there's an environment that stresses you, maybe only spend a little bit of time in that environment at the beginning. But it's actually the process of growing tolerance and building your comfortability in that situation. And that will look different for different people. But avoiding your environments that make you feel anxious will not solve your anxiety. Cool, fine. This one, your phone's making you anxious. I see so many teenagers who are so anxious all the time, and it is caused by phones, and it really sucks. There are a lot of studies out there that show your phones cause you anxious, specifically social media. One of the ways it really does this is creating short form content that basically gives your brain way too much dopamine. And what that does, it trains your brain to be overly happy, which long form stuff, like I do a lot of hobbies like sewing, crochet, things that trigger dopamine, which is the reward chemical. It doesn't work as well, and it makes you less happy overall. I have a friend who deleted social media at the beginning of this year. She says she's way happier than she was when she had social media. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there's also a lot of research, and there's more research coming out that shows this stuff. It's really hard to not be on your phone much, and it's really hard not to have social media, especially in this day and age where a lot of our life is built on having those things. And no, we can't cut it out completely, and you might not be able to, and like, that's okay. But the goal is to actually figure out how we can best deal with our anxiety in this situation and wonder what's worth keeping versus our anxiety. Like, is social media worth exacerbating your anxiety that much? How much is it? Do you know? Those are good things to figure out. And finally, this is just a plug. I'm not paid for this. I just like it. This app's called Opal. It shuts you out of apps better than any other time control software I've found, and it's really good, and it's just helped me regain a lot of my, well, not a lot, a little bit of my mental stability, because it'll lock you out of apps and you can't get in no matter what you try. Instagram, Facebook, I have them locked until 3 or 5 p.m. depending on the day, and they lock again at 9 p.m. and that's been really helpful. Cool. This is the book I mentioned. Talks about all these things way better and way more articulately than I do. Has a lot more time as well. Goes into biblical theology of anxiety. Has testimonies from people. Is a really long form kind of. You can pick it up and then put it down again. The chapters are pretty easy to read. This is a really good book. This is from a guy who has a degree in theology and has experienced significant anxiety and is working really hard to try and help Christians figure out some of the things around that anxiety that haven't been talked about before. It's a really good book to look at. Highly recommend. In my bag at the moment. Cool. Concluding thoughts. Don't try and implement every practical tip at once. That'll probably make you anxious as well. It will definitely make you anxious. I tried doing all of it at once. So pick one thing that you think might help your life. Start with that. Get that running. Anxiety is tricky beast. There's no quick fix. In case you haven't figured that out already, there's no quick solution to anxiety that's suddenly discovered. That's not how it works. If there is, I'd love to know. Maybe you can find it, but that's not quite how it works. If you're trying to care for someone with anxiety, listen first. Offer advice later. All this advice can come with great advice. Probably not the first thing someone with anxiety is looking for. If they've overcome their anxiety enough to tell you about it, sit and listen. And finally, offering to pray for someone is more powerful than asking someone if they've prayed about it, which I think is a really good thing, because often I'll bring my problems to, not often, but there are people who I've brought my problems to and they're like, have you prayed about it? And it's like, what do you think? Yes, I've prayed about it. If I'm stressed as much that I've actually come to another person and overcome my anxiety, I've probably prayed about it, because you know what? Talking to God is not as anxiety inducing as talking to another person, I find. Might be different for some people, but a lot of people I know, that's usually how their anxiety works. So, that's all I have to say. I hope some of it's made sense, some of it's been useful. I'm a bit of a rambler, so